The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, will meet today, Thursday, to discuss Niger after coup leaders who seized power on July 26 defied a deadline to reinstate the ousted president or face the threat of military intervention. However, ECOWAS, which has previously sent military forces into troubled member states and imposed sanctions, is at a crossroad due to some member states' rejection of a military invasion. The 15-nation bloc has taken a harder stance on the Niger coup, the region's 7th in 3 years, than it did on previous ones. As diplomatic deliberations continues in Abuja today, Niger's military junta has formed a new government. The move comes 2 weeks after the overthrow of President Mohamed Bazoum. The junta appointed 21 new ministers, and Ali Mohamed Lamine Zain will lead the government. Generals from the new military ruling council will head the ministries of defense and interior. The announcement comes as Niger's coup forces accuse French troops of releasing captured terrorists and violating the country's airspace ban in an attempt to destabilize the country. Joining us now from our London studio is Daniel Bwala, a lawyer and former PDP spokesperson during the presidential campaign for Atiku Abubakar. Good morning, Mr. Bwala, and welcome to the morning show.
Good morning, Daniel. It's good to see you. It's good to see you feeling very comfortable in the Arise News London studio. Anyway, I know that there's a lot that you would like to talk about. You've complained on social media about the likely militarization of diplomacy in the context of the crisis in Niger. The ECOWAS leaders are going to meet today to consider the way forward. What will be your recommendations to them, since we are looking for solution? We all know what the issues are.
Right. So thank you for having me. There is a law of leadership that says if you are leading and no one is following, you are simply taking a walk. That appears to be the situation that ECOWAS is in at the moment. As we speak up till today, the American government has not designated what happened in Niger as a military coup. Because if it did, the US government is expected by their law to cease all military assistance, technical support, and diplomatic relationship. The French government has not taken any measure comparable or commensurable to what ECOWAS is in discussion with. You see, the problem we have with ECOWAS, I think, is diplomacy. That is the problem that ECOWAS has. ECOWAS rolled out their threats before ever initiating the role of diplomacy. Now, there are facts that ECOWAS must live by, must come to terms with. Number one is that the Niger military junta will not bow to their threats and sanctions because it appears they have moved on. Even their president, the ousted president, was allegedly reported as having signed his resignation and has gone home. Number two, the military strike may cause a complex situation that may escalate to what we call the Africa Spring. Remember the Arab Spring. And if that happens, then even the leaders of ECOWAS states themselves might be removed from power. Number three is that diplomacy, not grandstanding, is the only option to return to democracy in Niger. And very importantly, even the process that will lead up to the return to civil rule may last up to a year and a half, because it will require the conduct of election. And if you want to know how long it will take, all you need is just to ask our Nigeria's INEC. Africa must reset relationships with the West for mutual and shared benefits. The idea of a puppet relationship will not be accepted by the civil populace in Africa. The political leaders and public officers must be accountable to their people. They must conduct elections that will reflect the wishes of the people, while the respect of the right of minority is protected. Here is where the problem is. There is a loss of confidence by the civil populace in Africa, even on their leadership. Which is why, for example, when you come to Nigeria and you look at the head of the ECOWAS, the president, he is leading and no one is following. He appears not to have the constitutional backing to engage militarily in Nigeria or using the Nigerian armed forces. If you look at Section 5, it is quite clear. Even the proviso in Section 5 and Sub 5, where it says you can engage in a special operation, Even then, he does not meet that test that will qualify for him to engage, because there is no imminent threat against the territorial integrity of Nigeria, against Nigerian interests, or against the people of Nigeria. He also does not seem to enjoy the popular support of the people to engage. There is no part of Nigeria at the moment you talk to people and environment that you will get the support of the people to engage militarily. If you go to Lagos as we speak and you take a poll to ask, that is the constituency where the president comes from, whether they will support a military engagement, I'm telling you, you will find that majority of the people will not support. So the question to ask is, what brief is Mr. President holding? Whose brief is Mr. President holding? And that is why ECOWAS is in a logjam at the moment, having flip-flop in their policies, haven't failed. In fact, this is even where the danger is. Even these sanctions that they are placing on Niger without engaging diplomatically, at the end of the whole attempt is to make sure that the Nigerian people feel that the military junta is not a legitimate government, and then they will react against the government. There are theories that said that that also may be counterproductive, because every single citizen of Niger at the moment appear to support the military junta because of the dissatisfaction about the West and the influence on their democratic leaders. So the bad side of it is that you might think the sanction is going to press them hard and make him unpopular, and they may convert that into renewed energy to engage against West African states. This is why ECOWAS has to be very careful.
Well, in response to your theory around sanctions, 11 political activists or political spokespeople in Niger have written a letter to the president saying that the sanctions are actually hard-hitting, and that the civilians in Niger are the ones who are suffering or the hard hit. So it does have an effect, and it does have an impact, and the people are responding, right? But beyond that, I'd like to ask you with regards to your series of tweets on why we must avoid a war with Niger, where you say that this particular war would actually, or is actually, between NATO and Russia, and that Africa should not try to come, or ECOWAS should not try to come in between or come into the big boys' fight. Can you expound on that, please?
So this is my feeling. ECOWAS is being tempted into throwing their dogs in a fight. If you look at what is happening in Niger, it appears to be the Champions League final of what is happening at the moment in Ukraine between Russia and the NATO. Interest. Now, one of the national security interests of a country is the territorial integrity, but one of the foreign policy of every country is national interest, which is why if you look at most parts of Africa, you see military base disguised in form of assisting militarily, but in actual fact protecting natural resources in those areas. Even if you come to the Lake Chad Basin in Nigeria, you will look at that. Now, what happened in Niger is a bloodless coup. There is an uncoded principles, even in coup, that where a coup is bloodless, you don't resolve it by blood. So where lies the threat of NATO, of ECOWAS? ECOWAS appear to be, and this is one of the problems we have in Africa, where when a leader is blackmailed by the West, or when they have a dossier on that leader, then they are likely to blackmail that leader into carrying out their wishes. There is no imminent threat against any ECOWAS state. What happened in Niger? No imminent threat. Usually, before you can come militarily, or before you can take measures or action that will be considered as severe, is where the action or where the conduct in that state poses imminent threat to the neighbors. Now, it was a bloodless coup. Nobody was killed. They have even gone ahead to form government. The United States of America, as we speak today, is engaging with them diplomatically, recognizing the existence and the operations of the leader of Niger. Now, NATO as a whole have member states. The interest in Niger is largely benefiting the NATO members. Recently, if you look at the dissatisfaction in Africa, most of the leaders in Africa, especially in places where there are military takeover, it is born out of this feeling that those civilian heads of state are puppet to the West. And so military are taking over. That is not supported, and I will not be the one here supporting that. But in actual fact, if you look at the engagement of members of these countries that are having military takeovers, you see that their relationship with Russia is deepening. You see that commitment that Russia is giving to them is deepening. In fact, even if you look at it from the larger point of, was it not African leaders that recently visited St. Petersburg, and they were given a forgiveness of about $200 billion? There is a cautious relationship, or there is a flirtatious relationship between Russia and the people in Africa. And I think that the leader of Russia is having a feeling that in order for him to properly fund the war in Russia, there is need for him to have and acquire resources in Africa, or to destabilize their focus in Africa, so that way they will be distracted from what is happening in Ukraine. So, and African leaders should be able to look at this from the point of view of Africa interest, because any shooting of a gun in Niger might not only affect the Sahel, but in the entire Africa might be affected, because you will see a ripples effect and a reaction from the people. And that is the reason why I feel that the Champions League final between NATO and Russia that they are planning to host in Africa should be avoided by the members of the ECOWAS.
In all of this, there's been a pushback in Niger. So some local rebel groups are beginning to say, we'll fight for Bazoum. What are the implications?
So this is the problem I have with the West. Because there is also a theory that the West is funding or they are engineering the rebel group, which of course, if you understand a little bit of intelligence, you will know that this is in the textbook. Oftentimes, because of certain diplomatic bottleneck, they will not engage militarily direct, even though they have their bases around these places. What they will do is that they will identify rebel groups. Even the civil society that Ayo talked about, that wrote a letter to the president saying we are hurting, we are feeling and all that. Come to Nigeria and go to Lake Chad, to Borno State, and look at most of the NGOs that are operating there. Most of them are intelligence collectors for certain interests in the West. And so when you see them reacting like that, it is seen most of the times as NATO activating the mechanism of using agents that they have on ground to create that sense of dissatisfaction. Nobody in a country will be happy. For example, if you look at Nigeria, are we all happy with what is happening? There is terrible economic situation. Why are people not talking about military takeover? Because we have come a long way. We are not looking back. Military takeover can never be a solution to the problem. So those who are supporting the idea of a counter coup by the use of these rebel forces in Niger, I hold the view that they do not hold the interest of Africa, because the minute the rebel group engage, then that means you are going to find a situation where there will be what we call arms group and warring factions. And before you know, it becomes a situation that cannot be controlled. So theories have counter theories. And it is my humble view that ECOWAS ought to play a part by engaging with the rebels group and all these people and tell them not to be involved. Because the whole idea is that once there is an armed conflict in Niger, look at the border states in Nigeria. Most of our people who live in the northwestern region have their relations in Niger. Once this conflict starts, there will be a humanitarian situation in that part of Nigeria. And when you look at some of our bandits and terrorists that have been coming through Mali, through our bushes and attacking, the minute you create a chaotic situation there, that either of this armed group is going to find them as worthy tools to use to destabilize the part of the West Africa. And that is the reason why we still hold the view that Africa must be delivered from the sense that the West holds its interest more than the interests of the African people. What they need to engage with the leader of Niger at the moment is to engage and say, what are your plans for a return to democratic rule? Do you have an agenda? How long is it going to take? Can you start creating political party? Because the man has moved on. He does not look like one that will budge, and using the military force will be counterproductive.
Well, Daniel Bwala, let me ask you, what's your assessment of the role of the international community so far, beyond ECOWAS? The EU, you know, the United Nations, and also the fact that those countries that have military bases in Niger just seem to be waiting on ECOWAS to take the initiative. Some of them have imposed sanctions. They've withheld international aid. Do you think that, you know, this is truly a proxy war that, you know, the West is trying to initiate?
Yes, I believe it's a proxy war that the West is initiating, and I've also believed that noticing that the president of, or the military junta in Niger is not planning to budge, so they are activating other means by either instigating, influencing, or threatening the people they have control over to ensure that the man is removed. The bigger question to ask is, I thought that the whole idea of a government is leadership by the popular view. If you look at the people in Niger after the military takeover, it appears majority of them are in support of the military takeover, not because they wanted a military intervention, but because they felt dissatisfied by their government. Africa must focus on the major problem confronting Africa at the moment. There is a growing dissatisfaction in Africa that African leaders are not delivering on the promises of democracy. This was how the Arab Spring started, and that's why we keep saying that ECOWAS and African Union must come together. Okay, I give you an example, Dr. Abati. Recently, our girls had a knockout stage with England, the women. They held them up to penalty, and that's the women. If you look at the youth, the men, in various aspects of life, in entertainment, in science and technology, in education, they compete favorably with global powers. But only when it comes to political leadership, our own leaders appear to be beggars. Every now and then, they travel for quote-unquote summit, cap in hand, begging for support. Sometimes, even the support they crave for can be found in just one or two politicians that have misappropriated the funds in their country. You will see Africa-Russia summit, Africa-US summit, Africa-France summit, and very shortly, you will see Africa-UAE summit, and you might also see Africa and Barbados summit. What is wrong with African leaders? So a lot of people in Africa believe that even the position that ECOWAS heads of state are taking, it is self-preservation position. They are all trying to preserve themselves in power. They are not looking at the intrinsic problem, the main problem, the root cause of the problem, which is economic prosperity is not being delivered to the people in Africa. The security of lives and property is not guaranteed in Africa. 60% of the ECOWAS members are battling terrorism in their countries. They cannot even find a defined way to move. And suddenly you want to intervene in another part of the world. As per United Nations, usually they play the role of sit down look at the moment until member states of the Union begin to pull strings that is to their benefit. It is quite obvious that there is a vast interest of the West, which is NATO, in Niger over and above Russia. And it appears that China and Russia are beginning to discover a new ground in Africa, which is the reason why we find that. Now, for God's sake, why won't ECOWAS be discussing the broader picture of the problem? Economic prosperity, delivering security, define relationship with the West, so that when we talk with the West, it is a shared interest rather than we come cap in hand begging. Why is this discussion not going on? Why is it not in their agenda? All that is in their agenda is how to place sanction. When I read the government of Nigeria saying central banks place sanction on Nigerians' interests, those who supported Coup, I asked, have you seen any business interest in Nigeria that is run by a Nigerian? Have you seen any business? Which identified politician or businessman from Niger has the government of Nigeria identified as a sponsor or supporter of the military junta? It's just doing copy and paste because Americans also announced it against Russia. Sorry to interrupt you.
Maybe the Nigerian government is targeting Nigerians who may possibly be sympathetic towards the coup in Niger. Maybe people like you who are saying don't intervene militarily. So if you have bank account, you better keep an eye on your financial details.
I wish I have investment in Niger. Now, if Nigerian government or central bank is targeting, possibly because it is alleged, possibly Nigerians who are sympathetic of Nigerian, then I sadly I will say that the president of Nigeria will be considered as engaging in an economic war against the northern Nigeria. Now, let me explain. most of Nigerians who share border with Niger, who have relations and family members in Niger, it is natural that some of them will have properties in Niger. Maybe some of them may have business interests in Niger. And since the central bank is not an intelligence agency like NIA that can identify and trace the funds of the businessmen as one that is supporting the Niger military junta, then that means the government is going to use a blindfold to classify every Nigerian who has a business or a property in Niger as someone who is supporting the Nigerians, and which is terrible, because at the end of the day, it will not be an intelligence-driven exercise, it will be politically motivated exercise. This is why people believe that this policy flip-flop is because Mr. President has not actually settled down to constitute an intelligence agency. He needs to have a workable, robust, intelligence-driven NIA. He needs to have a leader there. Because you see, what is happening between us and Niger and the rest of our members is actually at the moment the job of NIA and not the military. Because Nigeria is in no way engaged militarily or suffering a territorial threat with the people of Niger or any of our neighbors. Why has the NIA not given to the president information as to the fact that there was a planned military takeover? In Russia, the chief of intelligence was sacked by Putin because he failed to deliver this intelligence to Russia that Ukraine was about, taking certain steps like that. What is the role of Nigeria's intelligence agency in the whole of this conversation? We have not seen from the president or from a National Assembly or anybody any information from the Nigerian Intelligence Agency as to the operations of the Nigerians or certain threats around this border. So my view is that this is why a lot of people, I've seen one article even yesterday when somebody said the president's decision lately, it is like a clandestine war against northern Nigeria. This is what the president must avoid. What the president at the moment is actually confronted with is Nigeria. If only the president realized the enormous tax, the president would not have even accepted the role of ECOWAS chairs in the first place, because that role, understandably, was actually suggested to two presidents, and all of them declined because their countries didn't have the needed funds to finance ECOWAS. So this is the threat that subsidy removal savings is likely going to use to manage ECOWAS at the moment. Only God knows how much has been expended since this engagement and the meeting with ECOWAS heads of state. I think that either the West use this incident to distract the president from focusing on his primary responsibility, which is the security of lives and the welfare of the Nigerian people. In the last 2 weeks, we have not even talked about the fact that workers' salary, workers can't eat, prices of items are going up. We are focusing on Niger, which has no threat absolutely with the territorial border on the lives and security of the Nigerian people. The president needs to have a new DGNIA. He needs to constitute intelligent platforms in Nigeria and have intelligence collection that is reasonable for the purpose of this. CIA would have been, if it were in America, this is what CIA would have done. In fact, they can even perform special operation who does not require Senate approval and be able to curtail this problem. But have we had anything like that from the CIA and from the NIA?
Well, thank you very much. So you asked a very important question, which we'd asked earlier in different ways. I believe it was partially rhetorical when you asked, what is the problem with African leaders or African leadership? Because when you look at the Niger situation and the coups in the last 3 years in West Africa, you would see issues around leadership and an agitation for better leadership. So that's a question that we'll continue to answer, and perhaps we'll find a solution and get it right in Africa. But let me ask you a question with regards to the 1 year transition period that is speculated to perhaps would be requested by the coupists in Niger. And would you go for that in the area of dialogue and diplomacy, or would you rather, in terms of recommendations on the table this later today when the ECOWAS heads of state and government meet, should they give the Niger coupists a 1 year transition period? Or, as has also been said, as has also been said, this could also be a leeway for continuous, for a continuous military rule in Niger, as we've seen in Mali, as we've seen in Burkina Faso. 1 year becomes 2 years, 3 years, and then they stay put without a transition to democratic government.
So the unfortunate thing about military intervention is that once it happens, your first option is diplomacy. Your second is diplomacy. Your third and fourth, diplomacy. And then the last one, hard sanctions. Diplomacy means engaging. What are you up to? Why did you take over? They will tell you why they took over the government. What do you intend to do? They will tell you what they intend to do. This is the position of ECOWAS. So how do we meet at some point? Because this country must have a military leadership. And then they will tell you that our lack of confidence is actually with this leader because we believe he has entered relationship with the West. He has committed our resources to the West. He has done that, or he has violated the rights of our people, and we need to reset. And then he will tell you, okay, I need 6 months. You can say you need 3 months, or he say I need 2 years. You say no, 1.5 years. But realistically, the only path to return to civilian rule in Niger at the moment is a timetable for the conduct of election. The idea, we give you 7 days to leave that place. Even America cannot do that. And America has not done that. Because one, there are issues of territorial integrity. Where lies the power of ECOWAS to determine the rights of the people of Niger? Right? What is have they killed anybody? They didn't even kill the leader. It's an unfortunate situation, like I said, and I'll keep saying that military intervention can never be a solution in any part of Africa. But where the people are helpless, where the government is not giving a direction to the people, one of the cardinal roles of the military, if there is any institution in any country that preserves the entity and existence of that country, is the military. The reason America is the strongest country in the world is not because of their economy, it's because of their military might. That's why their defense budget is strong. They hold up the integrity. Where the ball players have misruled, it needs the military to redirect. Usually in diplomacy, you need other diplomatic leaders to engage. And where all else fails, before you see that. So the timetable, I think that ECOWAS should be realistic with the leader of Niger and said, give us the timetable for the conduct of election and return to civil rule. And let them keep having that negotiation along that line. If he gives a time that is longer, they can bring it closer. They can also bring their... And then the core issue will be, if you're conducting election to return, will Bazoum take part? It appears that the juntas will not want a situation where Bazoum will have to go back because they will believe that the West will still finance or fund him or support him to come back to power. So he might say that the process that will lead up to return to civilian rule will be one that excludes Bazoum. They might even identify people in their country based on their own local intelligence to say, these ones are being influenced by the West and we think they will not be a part of this process. And if you think that is wrong, then you can engage until you streamline and come to terms with them. That is negotiation, that is diplomacy. And that is the only path that will work. That's why the American government sent an envoy to go and meet with them. Even then, they denied access to that American high delegation to meet with the leader. And American government is not sending the F-18 and F-16. Then our own brothers are in the neighbors. This Niger that has been of great support to Nigeria, suddenly you say in 7 days you are going to go and take over the government there.
Only that I would like to challenge you on what you said, that the might of every nation is based on the military. I'm sure if you remember the conversation between Jean Law and I think it was Louis XVI about l'état c'est moi and l'économie c'est moi. And the man that said he owned the economy had the last laugh. And with the might of the American military, you know they couldn't beat the Viet Congs. It was no victor, no vanquish in Vietnam. And you remember, so when we talk about the might of military, let's also talk about the economy. And that's why I want to segue to conversation on the economy of Niger. Daniel Bwala, how can the Nigerians enjoy the fruit of the land? Because all of this squabble is because Niger has uranium, they have oil, but they live in abject poverty. How can they enjoy the fruit of their land? The biggest problem in Niger since they gained independence is that they've never enjoyed the fruit of their land. It is the French, it is the Russia, no, not the Russia, it is the Chinese and other interests that are enjoying the fruits of the land of Nigerians. How can an economy with so much uranium just be doing about 2.5 billion, and most of those money is even aid, not their own money that comes from the fruit of their land? And I also want you to talk about the interest of China in all of this, because China is quiet, but they've got good, big interest in Niger.
Right. I agree with you in the first part that economy determines military strength, because you have to have a strong enough economy to be able to fund the military. And that's why America is strong. So they are intertwined. Now, with respect to the Niger and their economy, and the fact that the impact of economy is not seen in the people, there are theories that will tell you most of the Francophone countries, that is the problem they encounter. If you make a call, it has to be routed through France. If you send a letter, it has to go through France. Virtually everything you do has to go through France before it comes back to the Francophone countries. That way, you're breaking down the income and resources and revenue that is being generated for the people. Secondly, their system of indirect, is it indirect or direct rule? That the system of governance is one that cherry picks key people in those countries and finance them and make them bourgeois, leaving the greater population in poverty. Now, otherwise, you would have thought that if you look at England and Nigeria, you look at US and some of the places of their interest, and you look at the France and the Francophone countries, and you look at the way they work, every one of them is believed to be taking advantage of the African states. But if you measure them against equitable principles, you will see that the Francophone have not been fair to the French-speaking countries in Africa. If you look at the use of how can you be exporting uranium? You don't have light in your country. Okay, the president of Nigeria just shot power or electricity to that country and they're already in darkness. Meanwhile, they have the natural resources that will power that country for the next 100 years without blink. That is point number one. Number two, if you place that in contradistinction with China and Russia, historically, especially Russia, historically, doing business with Russia has been more equitable with Africa. You know, Africans and Russia has been more equitable than with the West. Is there a possibility for a reset? Of course, for sure. Is Russian government doing, lowering the standards so he can buy up Africans? It might be possible. What about China? Look at all that China is busy doing. While the part of the West are giving loan, China started by giving, grants, helping the countries, and then comes with loan. So there is an interest from different parts of the world, but that of Russia and China, as of today, based on assessment, appear to be more beneficial to the African states. And that is why they are tilting towards Russia and China more than the West, because the West have been there. How can Nigeria, in Nigeria, for example, you want to go to England to study, look at the tuition fee. Even when you go and you study, they tell you you have 18 months to work and then you come back to your country. A relationship that had lasted for how long? But if you put that in contradistinction with some other powers that are showing interest in Africa, they will say, when you go and study, you have the right to stay for the next 5 or 10 years to work. All of these are part of the issues that border on economy. Look at who is controlling our finances. When somebody steals the Nigerian resources and sends it to the to the UK, the NCA, National Crimes Agency, would have seen the money leaving Nigeria to UK. They will never intercept it and stop it. When Nigerian government want to repatriate the money, then administrative bottleneck. Would you have believed that 25 years or more after Abacha has died, we will still be chasing Abacha money? The same thing with the US. You will see that people are moving the money under their wiretap law and all these things. They can track and trace and stop it, but they will not. To them, let these things come to our economy, because it will boost the economy. But when it has to go out, then we'll bring the issue of extradition law. We'll bring Desani. When Buhari came on board and Buhari wanted Desani to come, they created in England a very, very insignificant reason to keep Desani. They say she's required to attend police station. She went there, they say, okay, admit yourself to bail. And they told the Nigerian government that, okay, based on this, she cannot go. She has to stay here while we investigate in order to keep her away from Nigeria. So all of these things, ECOWAS need to look at it. It's reality, economy. Nothing is working in Africa. And Africa has the capacity to transform itself into a better continent than the West. Why? So introspection, analysis, and resetting of a relationship is key. It's very key. And that is why Russia is coming with all these overtures. He called them to St. Petersburg. He said, I forfeit the 200 billion. In fact, I will send you rice free. In fact, I will open up those places that I blocked for the West so that food will come into your country. And if a man is hungry and you're telling him, I will feed you, I will do this, I forgive you, he's more likely to listen to you than a man is hungry and you're telling him to accept gay right and transgender right before you give him any help. Virtually every help coming to Africa now is tied to certain rights that are not acceptable in our society. These are the things that ECOWAS should be focusing on. Economy. I agree with you, Rufai. They should be focusing. That's why, in fact, the very constitution of that body is economy, and they're engaging in military action. Economic community of West Africa, do we have free trade? Is the ease of doing business in West Africa good? You want to fly to Ghana, you are paying the same amount that you would have flown to London. So why won't you go to London and shop? You want to go to Kenya, you need this, you need that, you need that. You see Nigerians in Kenya at the immigration being treated as if they are animals. These are the issues that ECOWAS should focus on. That's how European Union came together. But the idea of cap and hand, okay, we will go in there and then you will give us this forgiveness, will never work.
Daniel, please, we have just about 2 or 3 minutes flat to go. Now, all of this is in the context of the meeting that ECOWAS leaders will hold later today. But I'd like to ask you, what is the worst possible scenario? France is under heavy pressure. Mali has broken 11 agreements that they signed in 1961. Burkina Faso has also cancelled the double taxation rule that they have in relation with France. So France can get desperate because it's losing its hold on those Francophone countries. The US, Victoria Nuland, going back to the US, having been snubbed, is also saying the US may not rule out military intervention. So even if the ECOWAS leaders say, well, you know, we'll pursue diplomacy, is it possible that France and the US and the Western allies can go in and save or protect the interests of their friend who has been displaced? And what will be the implications for us? Briefly.
Under international law of war and peace, no foreign nation has the right to invade another country militarily without a cause. Some of the causes are, and this is why if ECOWAS refuse to throw their dogs into the fight, the West will be brought to their knees to renegotiate. This whole idea is about negotiation. The West also does that. If you need to discuss the basis for which you are selling your item, probably you are selling it for 10 naira, now you want to sell it for 30. It is this kind of scenario that should bring all parties on board and let them discuss economic shared interests. Now, this is the worst case scenario, because the only way a territorial integrity can be invaded by the West is when African country is engaged militarily with the other. That is what would activate even some of the laws for African Command. They will now say, okay, we have been keeping our bases there in case of armed conflict, so now we want to come in and save. Now, even the contract you sign with these countries that they will defend you against the insurgents, if the countries say we don't need you, you still cannot come in. So, best case scenario is this is the time to renegotiate the basis for shared interest. Worst case scenario is that either ECOWAS will be compelled to go in and it will create crisis in Africa, and then these people will scramble for the resources, or if ECOWAS refuse, then this West will be forced to negotiate. Okay,
except that we don't have much time, but you know that we have seen countries ignoring UN resolutions, acting unilaterally, and you know, just defying orders in Iraq, in Libya, even Ukraine. Ukraine did not wait for anybody. Russia didn't wait for anybody before
they used nuclear weapon as an excuse.
Before he invaded
nuclear weapon as an excuse.
Well, but those resolutions that followed internationally, did they respect them? Anyway, thank you very much, Daniel Bwala.